Succession Part 1. After reproduction, the most essential element in ensuring the continuity of the dynasty, and so of the empire, was managing the succession. How exactly the first ruler of the Ottoman dynasty achieved recognition as a sovereign lord is unclear. Ottoman tradition locates the beginning of Ottoman independence in the first performance in Osman's name of the Friday prayer, the religious ceremony through which, in Islam, a ruler announces his sovereignty. This, the tradition asserts, took place in the town of Karajahisar in the Sakarya Valley. The chroniclers have assigned various dates to this event, and often embellished it to accord with their own particular understanding of Ottoman legitimacy. Whether the Karajahisar tradition is accurate or not, the survival of a coin bearing the inscription struck by Osman, son of Ertugrul '15 does confirm that Osman considered himself an independent ruler, since the issue of coinage, like the performance of Friday prayer in the ruler's name, amounted to a declaration of sovereignty. Succession in the Ottoman dynasty, therefore, begins with succession to Osman. Osman was followed by his son, Orhan, who, according to a 15th century tradition, succeeded to the throne during his father's lifetime. A second traditional story tells how, on Osman's death, Orhan's brother, Ali Pasha, voluntarily renounced all claims to rulership and retired to a life of contemplation. The first of these tales might perhaps be true, but the second is certainly a legend which an early 15th century chronicler concocted in order to provide a model of how the succession should be managed, in contrast to the sanguinary practices of his own day. 16. In one respect, however, the chronicler's story is correct. Even though Orhan never had a brother called Ali Pasha, he does appear to have succeeded to the throne without the bloodletting which characterized the beginning of subsequent reigns. Orhan's trust deed of 1,324 records, among the witnesses to the document, the names of his 4 brothers. One of these, Pazarlu, the Chronicle of John Cantacuzeno's records as a commander at the Battle of Pelican in 1328, suggesting that during Orhan's time, the ruler's brothers played some part in the government of his realms. So, too, did his sons. Orhan's eldest son, Suleiman Pasha, who predeceased his father in 1357, was Ottoman commander in Thrace in the 1350s, and captured Ankara in 1354. The Byzantine Chronicle of Nikephoros Gregoris, 2, notes that Orhan's son, Halil, was the governor of land on the Gulf of Izmit in 1357. Taken together, these fragmentary records suggest that, while Orhan was a sovereign ruler governing an indivisible realm, his brothers and sons continued to play important roles as governors and military commanders. Why Orhan, rather than any of his brothers, should have succeeded Osman is not clear. What is, however, certain is that, after his reign, the mode of succession was very different. In about 1400, the poet Ahmedi, in his brief verse history of the Ottoman kings wrote, of Orhan's successor, Murad I, 1362-89, his brothers became enemies to him, the affairs of all of them were ended at his hands, they were all destroyed by his sword. Although Ahmedi is unspecific in detail, the sense of Ahmedi's lines, provided one interprets brothers and apos, in its literal meaning 17, is quite clear. Following his succession, Murad killed all his brothers, perhaps during the course of a civil war, and established a precedent which the dynasty was to follow for over 200 years after his death. From Murad's time, the succession passed to whichever son of the Sultan defeated and killed his brothers or other claimants to the throne. Murad's son, Bayezid I, 1389-1402, succeeded his father after executing his brother Yaqub, according to a widespread tradition, on the battlefield of Kosovo in 1389.18. Thereafter, he ruled as Murad's only surviving son until his defeat and capture at the Battle of Ankara in 1402, an event which initiated the longest succession crisis in Ottoman history, the Civil War of 1402-13. The events in this struggle show how deeply rooted 2 principles of dynastic succession had by then become. The first, which seems to date from the earliest days of Ottoman rule, was that Ottoman territory was indivisible. The sons of Bayezid fought each other to the death rather than split up the lands that remained to them after Timur's victory. The second principle was that none of the sultan's heirs enjoyed primacy in the succession. The sultanate passed to whichever one of them could eliminate the competition. This seems also to have been a principle which the subjects of the dynasty recognized. Of the contestants for the sultanate in the civil war, only Isa, in his brief campaign of 1402-3 in western Anatolia, seems to have suffered rejection by his would-be subjects, and relied entirely for support on foreign dynasties. His brothers, Suleiman, Musa and Mehmed made foreign alliances, but were also to gain acceptance. and raise troops in the territories which they controlled. Ottoman subjects were, it seems, prepared to accept as ruler almost any legitimate heir to an Ottoman sultan, without regard to any order of precedence. Mehmed I, 1413-20, emerged as victor in the civil war, after his brother Musa had defeated and killed Suleiman in 1411, and he had himself defeated Musa 2 years later. These two fratricides did not, however, put an end to civil strife. After 1411, the Byzantine emperor had assumed the custody of Suleiman's son, Orhan, and, on at least 2 occasions, tried unsuccessfully to use him to foment conflict in the Ottoman lands. More important, however, was the survival of Mustafa, probably the youngest of Bayezid's sons. His fate in the aftermath of the Battle of Ankara is unknown, but, in 1415, he was in Trabzon, and next year raised an army in Rumelia and led an unsuccessful revolt against his brother. He, too, fled into the custody of the Byzantine emperor, and was still alive when Mehmed I died in 1421. It seems, from admittedly inconclusive evidence, that Mehmed I tried to end the practice of fratricide by abandoning the principle of indivisibility and bequeathing his lands in Rumelia to his elder son, Murad, and those in Anatolia to his younger son, Mustafa. Mehmed I's viziers, however, did not accept this scheme. Instead, they concealed the old sultan's death and summoned his elder son, Murad, whose reign as Murad II, 1421-51, began with renewed civil war. His first battle was not, however, against his brother Mustafa, but against his uncle of the same name who, when the Byzantine emperor released him from captivity, established a short-lived regime in Rumelia, minting his own coins and gaining the allegiance of the Rumelian lords. Mustafa defeated Murad's army under Bayezid Pasha, killing its commander, and then, proclaiming himself sultan at Edirne, crossed the straits to Anatolia. From Lake Ulyabat, more by trickery than by superior force, Murad drove Mustafa back across the straits to Edirne, where he seized and hanged him as though a common criminal. 19 This was not, however, the end of the civil war, since, in the second half of 1422, with the sponsorship of the Byzantine emperor and some of the dynasts of Anatolia, his brother Little and Abbas, Mustafa had established himself as sultan in Iznik. In January 1423, Murad crossed the straits to Iznik and, having defeated his brother, had him strangled. At his death in 1451, Murad left 2 sons, the adult Mehmed II, 1451-81, and an infant son by the daughter of Isfendiarulu of Sinop. Mehmed's first act on entering the palace at Edirne was therefore to ensure the security of his throne by ordering the execution of the boy. The succession of his son, Bayezid II, 1481-1512, was less straightforward. 20. Immediately on the death of Mehmed II, the viziers sent messages to his sons, Bayezid and Amasya and Jem in Konya. Bayezid was the first to arrive in the capital and, with the support of the Grand Vizier, Jedik Ahmed Pasha and, crucially, with the backing of the Janissaries, occupied the throne. When his brother Jem proclaimed himself sultan in Bursa, and Bayezid rejected his proposal to divide the Ottoman lands between them, it was Jedik Ahmed who defeated the prince at Yenis. Jem, however, escaped with his life and fled to the protection of the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt. In 1482, he returned to Anatolia, but when his army dispersed, he took refuge with the Knights of St. John on Rhodes. At this stage, Bayezid made an agreement with the Grand Master to keep Jem in safe custody, against an annual payment. His next move was to execute Jedik Ahmed, whom he seems to have suspected of disloyalty, and Jem's infant son. In a note in his own hand to a slave called Iskandar, he wrote, "And Abbas, you should know that I have killed Jedik Ahmed. You, too, should not spare Jem's son, but have him strangled. This is extremely important, but no one must be aware of it." 21. Jem's custody with the Knights marked the entrance of the Ottoman Sultan into Western European politics. The Knights transferred Jem to the safekeeping of their castles in France until 1489, when, contrary to the agreement, they handed him to the Pope. Bayezid had no alternative but to transfer payment from the Knights to the Pope to keep Jem in custody and, especially, to prevent his coming into the hands of the King of Hungary, or of any other potential enemy of the Ottomans, given the danger that his brother's release might cause. In 1490, Bayezid undertook not to attack Venice, the Papal States or Rhodes. In 1494, the Pope and the King of Naples sought his alliance against Charles VIII of France, but to no avail. When a triumphant Charles entered Rome in 1494, he took possession of Jem, declaring at the same time that he would lead a crusade against the Ottomans. the prospect of the Ottoman prince returning as a protege of the victorious King of France caused a panic in Istanbul. 22 However, in February 1495, Jem died in Naples still in the custody of the king, and the danger passed. Nevertheless, it was not until the return, after much negotiation, of Jem's body in 1499 and his public burial in Bursa, that Bayezid could be certain that his throne was secure.